The room went silent so fast that even the crystal chandeliers seemed to stop trembling. Lena Hartvale stood in the center of a ballroom, filled with people who had spent years perfecting the art of smiling while destroying someone's dignity. One hand pressed to the underside of her swollen belly, the other gripping the stem of a champagne glass she had no intention of drinking. She was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, lightheaded, and wearing a deep green dress she had chosen because Adrian once told her it made her look like life itself had decided to become a woman. That was before he let his mother strip her of her pride in front of 200 people. Vivian Vale lifted her glass, her diamonds flashing under the light, and said in a voice so polished it sounded rehearsed, "Before this family celebrates a child carrying our name, we require proof that the child belongs to our bloodline." There it was, not whispered behind closed doors, not hidden in a lawyer's email, not even disguised as concern, spoken into a microphone at Josephine Vale's 80th birthday gala, in front of politicians, investors, old money wives, reporters, from society columns, and every person Lena had spent the last year trying and failing to win over. For 1 second, she thought Adrian would stop it. She turned to him, because what else does a wife do when the floor disappears beneath her feet? She turned to the man whose child was stretching beneath her ribs, the man who used to kiss her forehead when she fell asleep on the couch, the man who once pulled over in the rain just to buy her strawberries because she had mentioned craving them in passing. He didn't look at his mother, he looked at Lena. And then he did the one thing she would remember for the rest of her life. He said nothing. The silence from him was worse than Vivian's cruelty, worse than the gasps, worse than the way Celeste, his sister, folded her arms with a tiny smile like she had been waiting all evening for this exact humiliation. Worse than the way Charles Vale kept his gaze lowered, not because he disagreed, but because cowards never look directly at the damage they help create. Lena felt her daughter move inside her, hard and sudden, as if even the baby could feel the insult. Someone in the crowd murmured, "My God." Someone else whispered, "I knew it." And that was the moment Lena understood. Something cold and irreversible. This had not been a spontaneous accusation. This had been planned. Every invitation, every flower arrangement, every violin note drifting through the ballroom, every smiling toast about legacy and family and honor had led to this moment. To a pregnant woman standing alone while the people who called themselves her family demanded she prove she had not betrayed them. Vivian tilted her head. "If there is nothing to hide, Lena, surely you won't object." Lena stared at her. The woman was immaculate in silver silk, every hair in place, every expression calculated. She had spent the first week of Lena's engagement calling her sweet girl, the first month of the marriage calling her unexpected, and the first trimester of the pregnancy calling her convenient. Vivian never screamed. She never had to. Her cruelty was always dressed as etiquette. Lena's throat burned. She could feel heat rising behind her eyes, and she refused, with every splinter of strength left in her body, to cry in front of them. Not here, now. Not where they would remember her. Tears longer than their own shame. So she set the untouched champagne glass on a passing tray, straightened her spine, and said, very clearly, "I'll take the test." A ripple moved through the room. Vivian smiled too quickly, already satisfied. But Lena was not finished. She placed both hands over her stomach, as though introducing the child they had insulted, and lifted her chin. "I'll take your test, Adrian. Can take your test. And when the truth comes back, you will all remember this night for the rest of your lives." For the first time, Josephine Valda, family matriarch, tiny and severe in midnight blue, Valda looked afraid. There was a flicker, barely there, but Lena saw it, and so did Adrian. That mattered, though she didn't know how much yet, because what none of them understood in that glittering room, what none of them could possibly have imagined as the orchestra froze and the guests pretended not to stare, was that Vivian Vale had just set fire to her own house, all because she wanted to see if Lena's baby deserved a family name. The cruel irony was that the child already did, more than any of them, months earlier. Before blood became accusation, and love became theater, Lena had believed she was one of the lucky ones. Not because her life had been easy, it hadn't. She grew up in a weathered little house on the edge of a coastal town where the paint peeled in summer and the pipes groaned in winter. Her mother, Elise Hart, restored old books and church records for the county archive when her hands were strong enough, and her father had been gone long before Lena was old enough to remember the sound of his voice. There were no trust funds, no summer estates, no silver polished by staff. There were library cards, borrowed dresses for school dances, hand-sewn curtains, and evenings spent listening to her mother tell stories about women who survived things no one ever applauded them for. Kind is not the same as weak, her mother used to say. Bent over a cracked leather ledger with a magnifying glass in hand, and quiet is not the same as small. Lena learned early how to make something beautiful out of what other people discarded. Torn paper, broken bindings, unsaid grief. She inherited her mother's patience, her steady hands, and her strange affection for forgotten things. By 29, she was working as a manuscript conservator at the City Museum, carefully restoring letters, ledgers, and diaries that wealthier people liked to display without ever understanding. That was how she met Adrian Vale. Not at a gala, not at a polo match, not in some cinematic moment with champagne and violins. She met him because he was late, very late. The museum had received a private donation from the Vale Foundation, a collection of 19th century family correspondence that required restoration before a public exhibition. Lena had stayed after hours cataloging the pieces when Adrian strode into the archive room, loosened tie, expensive coat damped from rain. Apologizing with a smile that would have been infuriating if it weren't so sincere. "I'm Adrian," he said, extending a hand. The negligent air sent to check on what my foundation has funded. Lena looked at his hand, then at the dripping umbrella he had leaned against a rare document cabinet, and said, "If you want these letters to survive another century, move the umbrella first." He laughed, not politely, not arrogantly. He laughed, like no one had spoken to him that way in years. And something in his face changed. He came back the next day, and then again the week after that. At first he claimed he was interested in the collection. Then he admitted he was interested in the woman restoring it. He brought coffee once and got her order wrong. Brought flowers once and chose lilies, which made her sneeze. Took her to a tiny ramen place 2 blocks from the museum because she refused every invitation to some place that required a reservation. An address she didn't own. He learned quickly that she hated performative generosity and loved old train stations. That she cried at cello music and could never walk past a used bookstore without going in. He told her things she suspected. He never told people from his world that he hated corporate dinners. That his father spoke in numbers, even at funerals. That his mother had turned emotional restraint into a religion. That sometimes he felt like his whole life had been chosen for him before he was born. With Lena, he seemed lighter. With Adrian, she felt seen. People always say the warning signs were obvious. They never are when tenderness arrives wrapped in exactly the shape of what you've been missing. He met her mother, and listened to her talk about ink acidity for an hour without checking his phone once. He sat on the Hart family porch and ate peach pie with a kind of easy warmth that made Lena believe class really didn't matter when love was honest. When her mother died 10 months later after a quiet, vicious illness she had hidden for too long, Adrian stood beside Lena through every hospital corridor, every signature, every numb hour after the funeral. He moved into her grief carefully, respectfully, never taking it over, staying. A year later, he proposed in the museum archive room where they had first met, kneeling between climate-controlled cases and centuries of history, holding out a ring that Lena nearly refused, not because she didn't love him, but because it was too expensive, too gleaming, too symbolic of a world she still didn't trust. He saw the hesitation and whispered, "Then forget the ring. Just say yes to me." So she did. And for a while she thought love might be enough to survive the family it came attached to. She met Vivian Vale 3 days after the engagement. Vivian's first words were, "You're prettier than I expected." Her second were, "I do hope you understand the pressure Adrian is under." Celeste Vale, Adrian's younger sister, was easier to read because she made no effort to hide her contempt. She was polished, fashionable, permanently unimpressed, and treated Lena the way some people treat weather and inconvenience they assume will pass. Charles Vale spoke less, but when he did, it was usually to ask questions that sounded friendly until you noticed they were all about money, family history, social position, and whether Lena had any relatives who might become unexpected obligations. Only Josephine, Adrian's grandmother, was difficult to decipher. She studied Lena the first time they met, as though trying to place a face from a dream she had years ago. Then, to everyone's surprise, she reached for the silver locket Lena wore around her neck and held it between 2 thin fingers. "Where did you get this?" Lena touched it instinctively. My mother's. It belonged to her mother before that. Josephine stared at the engraved crest on the back, a small, worn symbol, so faded Lena had never paid much attention to it, and let go. Keep it, she said softly. There was something strange in her voice. Not approval, not affection, recognition. Before Lena could ask, Vivian interrupted with a laugh and the moment vanished. The wedding was beautiful in the way expensive things often are, effortless on the surface, exhausting underneath. Vivian wanted a cathedral, press coverage, guest lists, built on strategic value. Lena wanted something small. Adrian promised compromises, and for a while he tried. But compromise became surrender in increments too small to notice until they had already swallowed the whole day. By the time Lena walked down the aisle, she was wearing a gown she hadn't chosen, carrying white roses Vivian preferred, smiling for cameras she never agreed to invite. Still, when Adrian took her hands and his eyes softened, the noise fell away. He looked at her like he meant every vow. Lena meant every one too. The first year of marriage was not unhappy. That was what made what came next so devastating. Because betrayal is easier to survive when it arrives from a monster. It is far more brutal when it comes from someone who once loved you well enough that you built your future around the memory of it. They moved into a penthouse overlooking the river. All glass and stone and curated perfection. Lena kept working at the museum because she needed something in her life that belonged entirely to her. Adrian said he admired that. He said he loved that she wasn't impressed by excess. He said he wanted their marriage to be different from his parents, which seemed to function mostly as a merger with matching jewelry. Then came the first pregnancy. Lena hadn't known how much she wanted that child until the doctor smiled and said, "Congratulations." Adrian cried in the car on the way home, laughing at himself and wiping at his face. And Lena thought, "This is the man I married." They told the family too soon. Vivian immediately spoke of heirs and schools, and how the announcement would affect quarterly optics for a foundation gala. Celeste joked that maybe motherhood would finally make Lena take appearance seriously. Josephine only asked if Lena was resting enough. At 11 weeks, the baby was gone. The grief nearly killed the softness between them. Not all at once. Not dramatically, it eroded things. Adrian buried himself in work. Lena buried herself in silence. Everyone around them seemed to expect recovery on a schedule. Vivian sent white orchids and a note that read, "These things happen. Best not to dwell." Lena kept that note. Not because it comforted her, because someday, she thought, she would need to remember exactly who these people were when she was at her lowest. A year passed. Then another. The second pregnancy came after a season of guarded hope. Lena did not tell anyone until she was nearly 14 weeks along. She wanted to protect the fragile little world growing inside her from other people's entitlement. She wanted to hear her baby's heartbeat enough times that it began to sound like promise instead of possibility. This time, the doctor said everything looked good. This time, Adrian smiled more. This time, for a few precious weeks, Lena let herself imagine nurseries and tiny socks and sleepy dawn feedings and the warm, impossible weight of a child placed on her chest. Then Vivian found out, and suddenly the baby stopped being a child and became a legacy issue. The Vale family had money, enough to have become myth in the city. Their wealth came from shipping, land, rail, then private equity, then medical technology. Whatever century offered, the Vales found a way to own a profitable piece of it. They funded hospitals, museums, political campaigns. Their last name opened doors that stayed locked to everyone else. But for all the things they had modernized, they never let go of one obsession. Bloodline. Legacy, in the Vale family, was not a sentimental word. It was a weapon. Vivian began calling daily. She sent nutritionists Lena hadn't requested, interior designers for a nursery Lena wasn't ready to decorate, and a woman who introduced herself as a maternal image consultant, which made Lena laugh so hard she nearly cried. She also began dropping strange little comments into conversation. You know how people talk, of course. Adrian has always been admired. Timing matters with these things. Lena dismissed it at first because decent people do not immediately imagine that the mother of their grandchild will be accused of infidelity. But the comments kept coming. So did Celeste's little digs. Usually wrapped in social concern. It's just that Adrian was traveling so much in those weeks. Wasn't he and he were having problems around then, weren't you? Honestly, if I were you, I'd want to silence rumors before they start. Rumors. There had been no rumors until they started manufacturing them at 19 weeks. Lena discovered Adrian in his study late one night, staring at an email on his laptop. He closed it too quickly. Asterisk, what was that? She asked. He rubbed a hand over his face. No, nothing makes you look like that. He stood, crossed the room, kissed her temple. It's just family nonsense. She pulled back. What kind of nonsense? For a moment, he said nothing. Then, my mother thinks, she thinks because we had that rough patch in December, people may question the timing. Lena looked at him as if he had spoken another language. People? Or your mother? Adrian's jaw tightened. Lena, no. Say it clearly. He exhaled. My mother thinks a paternity test would shut everyone up. The room seemed to tilt. And what do you think? He reached for her. She stepped away. Lena, I know this baby is mine. And why are we discussing it? Because my family is insane about this stuff. And if one test ends it, she laughed once. Short, sharp, unbelieving. A test doesn't end suspicion, Adrian. It rewards it. He tried to soothe her, tried to call it practical, tried to make humiliation sound administrative. By the end of the argument, Lena was crying in a bathroom with the door locked, one hand over her mouth so he wouldn't hear. Realizing that the danger to her marriage had never really been Vivian Vale. It was Adrian's lifelong instinct to survive his mother by appeasing her, and appeasement always demands a sacrifice. This time it was his wife. After that night, everything grew colder, not visibly, not in ways other people would notice. Adrian still kissed her goodbye, still asked how her appointments went, still came home, though later and later. His shirt carrying traces of cologne she didn't recognize, not necessarily another woman, but definitely another life. A life where Lena's pain could be compartmentalized. Asterisk. When she refused a private test Vivian arranged, the retaliation became subtle and strategic. Her museum contract renewal was suddenly delayed after a donor complained. Her access to a charitable arts grant disappeared. An article in a society blog described her as the museum conservator who married into scandal. A photograph circulated online of Lena having lunch with her colleague Marcus, cropped tightly enough to look intimate, though in reality they had been discussing an exhibition over soup and stale bread. Celeste sent the article to Adrian before, Lena could explain. Adrian didn't accuse her directly. That somehow hurt more. He just asked too many careful questions. And in his caution, she heard the rot spreading. By the time Josephine's gala arrived, Lena already knew the family had decided to make her prove herself. She simply didn't know they intended to do it under a chandelier and heels while a string quartet played dot, and so the test was arranged not because she wanted to satisfy them, because she wanted the truth, documented in a way no one in that family could twist. Dr. Naomi Reyes handled Lena's prenatal care. She was one of the few people in the Vale orbit who treated Lena like a person instead of a vessel for inheritance. Naomi had sharp eyes, no patience for nonsense, and a calm voice that somehow made everything around her feel less dangerous. When Lena told her what had happened at the gala, Naomi went very still. He did this publicly. Lena nodded. Naomi set down the file in her hand. Then we do this properly. Legally, medically, and with independent oversight. Adrian submitted his sample 2 days later. Lena submitted hers the same afternoon. Vivian, unsatisfied, pushed for additional hereditary screening under the excuse that the Vale family carried a rare blood-related condition documented across generations. Naomi objected to the family's involvement. But the request itself wasn't irrational from a medical standpoint, and Lena, tired, angry, determined, agreed if they wanted science, she would give them more science than they could survive. What? The lab processed the samples. The pressure escalated. Vivian requested that Lena temporarily move into Blackthorn House, the Vale family estate, for support. Lena refused. 2 days later, Adrian suggested it would be easier if she did, just until tensions calmed. She stared at him across the breakfast table and realized he no longer heard how much he sounded like them. No, she said. I'm not moving into a mausoleum so your mother can supervise my pregnancy like inventory. He pushed his chair, backed her fast. Why do you make everything harder than it has to be? Lena blinked at him, stunned. Harder. Yes, harder. Every conversation becomes a moral stand with you. Because your family keeps asking me to kneel. He left without finishing breakfast. That night he didn't come home by then. Lena had stopped telling herself it was just stress something. And Adrian was breaking under family pressure, under expectation, under the lifelong conditioning that told him peace mattered more than courage. But instead of fighting the people crushing him, he was letting them redirect the force onto her. The first person who truly frightened Lena was not Vivian, it was Charles. Charles had the stillness of a man who understood institutions better than emotions. He invited Lena to lunch at his office, and against Naomi's advice, she went, partly because she was still clinging to the idea that some adult in that family might yet choose decency. He poured her tea in a conference room overlooking the city and spoke softly, almost kindly. You must understand, Lena. No one is trying to hurt you. She nearly smiled. That would be more convincing if your wife hadn't accused me of cheating in front of 200 people. Charles folded his hands. Families like ours survive on certainty. Families like yours survive on fear. Something flickered in his expression, but only briefly. If the results are as you claim they will be, or this becomes unfortunate history. If not, it would be better for everyone if the matter were handled discreetly. There it was, the implication, polished until it gleamed. If not, sign something. Go quietly. Disappear before birth. Lena stood. My child is not a public relations problem. No, Charles said. Your child is a legal one. She left shaking so badly she had to sit in her car for 20 minutes before she could trust her hands on the steering wheel. That same evening, she drove not home, but to the small coastal town where she had grown up. She hadn't planned to go, but grief and instinct have their own geography, and when Lena felt most alone, she always ended up where her mother used to be. The house was empty now, inherited by her Aunt Miriam, Elisa's older sister, who lived mostly in the back rooms. Among boxes of records and old lace curtains, Miriam opened the door, took one look at Lena's face, and said, "He let them hurt you, didn't he?" Lena burst into tears so suddenly she couldn't answer. Miriam held her until the sobbing passed, then made tea strong enough to wake the dead and waited when Lena finally told her everything. Miriam listened with the grave stillness of a woman who had seen enough of life to know that some stories cannot be interrupted. When Lena reached the part about Josephine touching the locket and going pale, Miriam's hands stopped moving. She saw it. Yeah. Miriam looked toward the hallway, toward the room that used to be Elisa's study. Then maybe it's time. Time for what? Instead of answering, Miriam rose, disappeared for several minutes, and returned with a cedar box wrapped in a faded shawl. This was your mother's, she said. She wanted to show you years ago, but then she got sick, and after she died I didn't know if it would matter. Maybe I was wrong. Inside the box were papers so old they smelled like dust and rain, a tiny silver baby rattle engraved with the same worn crest from Lena's locket, a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, a small leather diary with water damage along the edges, and a name written inside, in careful ink, Roseheart. Lena frowned. Who was she? Our ancestor, Miriam said. Or at least that's what your grandmother believed. She worked at Blackthorn House generations ago. We never had the full story, only fragments. Your mother thought there was something strange in the family line, but she never had time to finish tracing it. Lena opened the diary with trembling fingers. Many pages were unreadable. Others survived in broken patches reference to service, a terrible storm, a birth, a crying infant, a promise made under threat, a woman named Eleanor, a doctor whose hands shook, blood on linen, and one line underlined so deeply it had nearly cut through the page. They took the child of my body, and gave me another with a house seal tied to a blanket. Lena stopped breathing for a second. What is this? Miriam shook her head. I don't know. But your mother said if the Vales ever looked too closely at our family, it would be because they were afraid of what they'd find. That night, Lena didn't sleep. She read every surviving line 3 times. She compared the crest on the locket to the crest on the baby rattle. She found one letter written decades later by a descendant who claimed Roseheart disappeared from Blackthorn House with an infant and a sealed note from a dying maid. Another mentioned a lady's child sent away to preserve the house. None of it was complete. None of it was enough on its own, but it was enough to tell Lena one thing. Her family's history and Adrian's family's history had crossed long before she ever met him. Asterisked by morning. She called Dr. Naomi Reyes and asked one question. When the results come back, do not release them to anyone without me present. Naomi's pause lasted just a second too long. Lena, she said carefully, there's something you need to know. The meeting was scheduled at the clinic under strict confidentiality. But confidentiality is a fragile thing when money enters a room before you do. By the time Lena arrived, Vivian, Charles, Adrian, and Josephine were already there, along with a family attorney Lena had never seen, and an expression on Vivian's face so confident it made Lena feel strangely calm. People are most careless when they think they've already won. Naomi entered with a sealed file and an independent genetic counselor at her side. She did not sit, she did not smile. The paternity results are conclusive, she said. Mr. Vale is the biological father of the fetus, with probability exceeding 99.99%. The air changed. Lena turned toward Adrian and watched relief hit him so hard he had to sit back down. For one heartbeat she saw the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had never really wanted to believe the accusation in the first place. Then Vivian spoke. Well, thank God that ugly matter is settled. Naomi didn't hand over the file. It is not settled. Vivian's smile faded. The genetic counselor cleared his throat and opened a second report. During the requested hereditary screening, the lab identified a lineage anomaly connected to a rare blood-related marker present in the maternal sample. Vivian frowned. Speak plainly, Naomi did. The marker historically documented in the Vale family records is not present in Mr. Adrian Vale. It is present in Lena Ha. Silence. Charles straightened. That's impossible. Naomi's expression hardened. The lab rerun the analysis twice. The counselor continued. More importantly, the pattern suggests the marker passed through a maternal line associated with the earliest recorded Vale medical archives. In plain terms, the woman carrying the historic Vale blood signature in this room is not from the Vale family by name. He looked at Lena. It is Mrs. Hart Vale. Josephine made a sound so small it barely counted a sound at all. Vivian stared, as if language itself had betrayed her. No. Adrian looked from Lena to the file to his grandmother. What does that mean? Naomi answered before anyone else could. It means the reason this marker appears in Lena and not in the acknowledged Vale line is that somewhere in the family's history, the documented bloodline and the actual bloodline separated. Charles stood so abruptly his chair hit the floor. That is nonsense. Some laboratory error. The paternity results are accurate. Naomi cut in. And this secondary finding has been independently reviewed. If you want to challenge it, you'll need better grounds than disbelief. Lena should have felt triumph. Instead, what she felt was a sickening lurch of intuition. Because Josephine was no longer shocked, she looked devastated. Adrian turned to her slowly. Grandmother. Josephine's hands shook. She pressed them together, in her lap as if trying to keep the past from spilling through her fingers. I heard whispers, she said. Vivian's head snapped toward her. Mother. Josephine closed her eyes. When I was a girl, my father forbade the servants from speaking of a woman named Rose. There was an old portrait once, hidden in the west corridor, of a child wearing that crest on a ribbon. It disappeared before I was 12. Later, when Charles was born, a physician mentioned the family marker had not appeared in him, and my father nearly had the man dismissed. There were rumors of a switch, a lie at the beginning of the line. I never had proof. All eyes turned to Lena. The locket at her throat suddenly felt heavy as iron. She reached into her bag with trembling hands and placed Rose Hart's diary on the table. She said. What followed did not feel like a meeting. It felt like the floor of history cracking open beneath everyone at once. Naomi read the surviving entries, though Tony read the names. Josephine wept silently before she had even finished the third page. Vivian tried twice to interrupt and twice failed. Adrian sat, frozen, his entire life rearranging itself faster than his face could keep up. One entry described a storm, and two births in Blackthorn House on the same night in October of 1824. Lady Eleanor Vale delivered a daughter. Rose Hart, a housemaid, delivered a son in the servants' quarters. Gideon Vale, desperate for a male heir to secure a shipping contract that required legitimate male succession, ordered the family physician to exchange the children. Eleanor was told her daughter died before dawn. Rose was told her son had been stillborn and was handed Eleanor's living infant wrapped in linen marked with the house seal. The physician, heart-mad with guilt, left a confession with a maid before taking his own life years later. Rose fled. The official family line continued through Rose's son, raised as the heir. Eleanor's true bloodline vanished into poverty under the Hart name. For 200 years, the wrong child had inherited everything. And now the woman they had publicly accused of carrying a stranger's baby was the descendant of the very woman whose blood they had worshipped. Vivian was the first to recover enough to become vicious. This proves nothing legally, she said. A damaged diary, a servant's fantasy, Convenient timing. Lena lifted her gaze. You demanded a blood test. Vivian's mouth tightened. You wanted science, Lena continued. Now you have it. You wanted proof of blood. Now you know whose blood you've been living on. Charles spoke to the attorney in a hard whisper. The attorney looked ill. Adrian said nothing. Not one word. And in that moment, Lena understood the cruelest thing of all. Even now, with the truth detonating around them, he was still deciding which loss frightened him more, losing his family's approval or losing her. She got her answer that night. He came home after midnight, found Lena in the nursery. She had only just begun to paint, and stood in the doorway, like a man arriving late to his own life. I didn't know, he said. She kept painting the wall. I believe you, she answered. Her silence stretched. He took a step closer. This changes everything. She finally turned. Does it? His eyes searched hers, desperate now. Lena, listen to me. We can handle this privately. My parents are panicking. There are trusts involved, board seats, properties, old agreements. If this gets out, she laughed softly, and the sound broke something in him. There it is. What? I still think this is about protecting me. No, I'm trying to protect us. No, she said, setting down the brush. You're trying to protect the structure that crushed me and now threatens to crush you. He raked a hand through his hair. I'm on your side. Were you on my side at the gala? His face fell. Were you on my side when your father implied my child should disappear discreetly? Were you on my side when your mother turned my pregnancy into a scandal? Were you on my side when they looked at me like dirt and you asked me to make it easier? He had no answer because there wasn't one. That was the night Lena asked him to leave. He did. Though slowly, like a man still hoping she would stop him. She didn't. The next weeks became war. The Vale family moved fast. The way powerful people always do when truth threatens money. Legal teams appeared. Archivists were contacted. Blackthorn House was closed to outside visitors. Social stories began circulating, suggesting Lena had fabricated evidence to extort the family. An anonymous source leaked that she was emotionally unstable from pregnancy complications. Someone tried to break into Aunt Miriam's house and stole only one thing, a packet of letters Lena had already copied. Asterisk, asterisk. Vivian sent flowers with no note. Charles offered a settlement through counsel. Celeste posted a photograph of Adrian from years ago under the caption, "Real legacy can't be forged." Lena, who had spent most of her life repairing fragile pages with tiny tools and patient hands, discovered she had a talent for surviving elegant cruelty. She hired Daniel Mercer, an attorney Naomi recommended because he despised old money intimidation, on principle, and smiled like a wolf whenever someone underestimated his client. He helped Lena secure the diary, the copied letters, and the genetic reports. He also found something Charles had hoped no one ever would. The original trust instrument for Blackthorn House. It had been amended over generations, hidden beneath newer corporate structures, but its founding clause remained intact. The estate and several attached assets were to remain in stewardship for the direct, lawful descendants of Eleanor Vale, not Gideon. Eleanor. The very woman whose child had been stolen. The room went quiet when Daniel read that aloud. Lena sat with one hand over her belly, feeling her daughter roll beneath her skin as if she already understood that the dead had finally found a voice through the living. If the diary and blood evidence held, the implications were catastrophic. Not just socially, legally. The modern Val Empire would survive, of course. Money that old always finds ways to survive. But Blackthorn House, key lands, private holdings established under the original line, certain endowments, family jewels catalogued under legacy trust, those could all be challenged. Which explained why the family's panic had turned feral. It also explained why Josephine asked to see Lena alone. They met in the garden of a church where no reporters ever waited. Josephine arrived without staff, wearing black gloves, despite the mild weather, looking smaller than Lena remembered. For a while she simply watched children play near the fountain. I failed you, she said at last. Lena said nothing. Josephine nodded once, as if silence were fair. I knew enough to suspect, not enough to act. In families like mine, suspicion becomes its own prison. You are taught not to pull at old threads because the whole tapestry may collapse. You let them humiliate me. I did. Lena turned to her then, stunned by the bluntness. Josephine's eyes shone. And I will regret that until I die. It would have been easier if the old woman had defended herself. Easier if she had made excuses. Instead, she looked exactly like what she was, a matriarch who had ruled a dynasty but lost the courage to stop its worst instincts. I want to help you, Josephine said. Why now? Josephine looked toward Lena's stomach. Because the child they tried to deny is innocent. Because Eleanor was innocent. Because Rose was innocent. Because every generation of women in this story paid for men's fear and women's cowardice. From her bag, she withdrew a sealed envelope. My father kept this in a locked drawer. I took it after his death and never opened it. I was afraid of what it would confirm. Inside was a brittle letter written by the physician named in Roseheart's diary. It was not a full confession, but it was enough. He described pressure from Gideon Vale, the exchange of infants, and the final line so raw it made Lena grip the paper, harder to steady herself. The house was built upon a mother's grief and a servant's stolen son, and no blessing will rest easy upon it. The letter changed everything. It gave Daniel what he needed to force a hearing. It gave historians a trail. It gave journalists enough scent that the story began leaking despite every effort to suppress it, and it gave Adrian a choice he had delayed too long. He came to Lena again, not at the penthouse this time, but at the small townhouse Naomi had helped arrange when media began camping outside her building. He looked older, truly older, as if the past few weeks had stripped away the polish wealth used to keep him preserved. My father knew, he said. Lena didn't invite him in. He stood on the doorstep like a man facing judgment. I confronted him. He admitted there were rumors. He said his father warned him never to dig. He said blood doesn't matter because they built the family anyway. Lena's laugh held no warmth. Convenient philosophy from people who demanded blood from me. I know, do you? He swallowed. I was wrong. The words landed, but too late, too damaged to become shelter. He looked at her stomach and his face cracked open with something that might have been love, might have been grief, might have been the unbearable recognition of what he had done to the mother of his child. I should have protected you, as Lena said. He closed his eyes. I want to make this right. No, Adrian, you want to suffer less. The truth of it hit him hard enough that he had to look away. Lena softened then, but not in the way he hoped. Softness is not always forgiveness. Sometimes it is simply clarity without cruelty. I loved you, she said quietly, and part of me probably always will in some wounded place I don't control. But love is not the same as trust. And what you broke in me happened while I was carrying our daughter. Every time I was afraid, she felt it. Every time I cried, my body carried that storm around her. You let your family turn the holiest thing in my life into evidence against me. Tears stood in his eyes. She had never seen him cry like this. No, she said. You know now. That is not the same thing. He nodded because he had no defense left. Before he left, he put an envelope on the hall table. Inside were internal emails, board messages, and archived family correspondence he had copied from Charles's office. Proof that Vivian and Charles had discussed paternity optics long before the gala. Proof that Charles intended to pressure Lena into signing away any claim if the baby proved to be Adrian's. Proof that they knew the heritage issue could threaten trust assets and wanted Lena discredited before any historical evidence emerged. It wasn't redemption, but it was finally a choice. The hearing took place 6 weeks later, and by then the story had spread far beyond society gossip. People are always hungry for scandals involving the wealthy. But this one touched a deeper nerve because beneath the money and genetics and estate law was something ancient and brutal. A woman had been accused, shamed, and asked to prove her purity, only for the test to reveal that the people judging her were the ones built on a lie. The hearing room overflowed. Journalists filled the back rows. Historians, trustees, attorneys, and distant relatives lined the walls. Vivian arrived, in pearl white, as if dressing for innocence could summon it. Charles looked tired for the first time in public memory. Celeste avoided cameras entirely. Josephine sat behind Lena, hands folded around a cane. Her face set in the solemn stillness of a woman finally choosing truth over blood-conditioned silence. Adrian came. Alone, no family beside him, no lawyer whispering. Into his ear he took a seat where everyone could see him and did not once look away when the evidence was presented. The genetic counselor explained the rare lineage marker and its significance. Naomi testified about the independent chain of custody for the prenatal and hereditary testing. Miriam described the cedar box, Elise's unfinished research, and the family law passed down in broken whispers among the hearts. An archivist traced the crest on Lena's locket, and the baby rattled to an early bell. Household sealed, discontinued. After the first generation, Daniel read the physician's letter aloud. But the moment that broke the room came from an unexpected witness. An elderly woman named Agnes Bell, 89 years old and nearly blind, was wheeled in by her grandson. Her grandmother had served as a maid at Blackthorn House and preserved oral histories the official family records never wanted kept. Agnes testified in a thin but steady voice that the women in service had always known there was a stolen child in the story, and that one phrase had survived every generation. Asterisk, the wrong cradle was carried upstairs. When she said it, Josephine covered her mouth and bowed her head. Vivian rose, objected, called it folklore, class resentment, myth-making. Then Daniel produced one final document, a handwritten inventory from Blackthorn House dated 3 weeks after the 1824 births, recording the disposal of bloodied servant linens and the transfer of an unnamed female infant's wrap marked with a house seal. It was enough not to rewrite every corporate holding in a day, not to undo 200 years, but enough to establish, with overwhelming force, that the accepted bloodline of Eleanor Vale had been diverted, concealed, and falsely inherited through the line that became the modern Vales, while Lena Hart descended from the dispossessed branch. When the presiding judge summarized the preliminary findings, his voice carried across the room with devastating calm. The court is not here to adjudicate history's every cruelty, but where historical fraud affects present trust ownership, the law must respond. The evidence presented today strongly supports the claim that Mrs. Lena Hart Vale descends from Eleanor Vale's biological line, and that the family historically recognized as direct heirs may not. The room erupted. Reporters surged. Voices rose. Vivian turned white, truly white, then rounded on Charles with a look that said their private blame had already begun. Celeste fled through a side door. Josephine wept openly. Adrian sat with his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched. Lena, through all of it, felt only one thing, stillness, the kind that comes after a storm so violent it has stripped everything unnecessary away, and then her water broke. For one stunned second, no one moved. Then Naomi, who had attended in case of stress complications, was suddenly at Lena's side. Okay, breathe, don't panic. Lena almost laughed at the absurdity. 2 centuries of buried lies surfaced in court, and her daughter chose that exact moment to enter the world. Of course, she whispered. Adrian was beside her in an instant. Lena, she looked at him, and what she saw there was not entitlement, not weakness, not family calculation, just terror and love, and the helplessness of a man who had arrived too late to the truth but not too late to witness its cost. Please, he said. Naomi glanced between them. Is he coming? Lena closed her eyes through a contraction that felt like the earth folding in on itself. When it passed, she nodded once. Yes, he's coming. Labor lasted 14 hours. Pain has a way of reducing the universe to breath, pulse, bone, endurance. Yet even inside that ancient tunnel of human suffering, Lena remained aware of strange details. The antiseptic smell of the delivery room, the soft whir of machines, Naomi's low instructions, Miriam praying quietly in a chair near the window, Josephine sending word from the waiting room, and Adrian standing where Lena allowed him to stand, close enough to matter, not close enough to claim anything he had not earned back. At one point, during the worst of it, Lena gripped his wrist so hard she left crescent marks in his skin. Is what it felt like, she gasped. He leaned closer. What? To carry love while everyone around it made me feel ashamed? His eyes filled. Sorry. Another contraction tore through her. She nearly crushed his hand. Be sorry for the rest of your life, she said. I will. And somehow, because she believed him, the anger inside her shifted, not gone, not absolved, but transformed into something less jagged. Just before dawn, her daughter was born. She arrived, furious, red-faced, perfect, and loud enough to silence every ghost in the room. When Naomi laid the baby on Lena's chest, the entire story, gala, betrayal, blood tests, dead women, stolen lineages, courtrooms, wealth, humiliation, fell away before a single overwhelming truth. Mine. Lena looked down at the tiny face pressed against her skin and cried with a depth that had no language in it. Adrian cried too, quietly, one hand over his mouth, afraid to touch what he had almost lost. What's her name? Naomi asked gently. Lena looked at Adrian. He shook his head. You choose. She studied her daughter's face. so new and yet already carrying generations in her blood, and said, "Eleanor Rose, for the woman whose child was stolen, for the woman who raised a stolen child not knowing, for every mother in the story." Adrian bowed his head and wept. In the weeks that followed, the city devoured the scandal exactly as expected. Headlines called it the bloodline betrayal, the air test reversal, the Blackthorn secret. Commentators argued over inheritance, class, gender, legitimacy, and whether biology should matter at all. But people who asked that last question rarely understood the real wound. This was never about blood being superior, it was about blood being used as a blade against a pregnant woman, only to reveal the hypocrisy of those holding it. The legal consequences rolled in slowly, then all at once. Trust assets tied explicitly to Eleanor Vale's line were frozen pending formal redistribution. Internal audits uncovered financial manipulation Charles had buried for years under family authority. Vivian resigned from 3 boards before she could be pushed. Celeste disappeared to Europe after private messages surfaced showing she helped circulate the rumor campaign against Lena. The Vale name, once synonymous with immaculate prestige, became a case study in generational entitlement devouring itself. Josephine transferred what personal authority she still held to support the legal correction and publicly acknowledged Lena and Eleanor Rose as the rightful matrilineal descendants of the Blackthorn legacy. It was the first truly brave thing she had done in decades. As for Adrian, the world expected either a grand romantic reconciliation or a clean villain's exile life. As always, was less tidy. He moved into an apartment 5 minutes from Lena's townhouse. He attended every pediatric appointment she allowed, every late-night fever call, every exhausted morning when Eleanor Rose screamed until dawn and nothing soothed her except being walked by someone too tired to stand straight. He never once asked Lena to forgive him on a deadline, never used the baby as leverage, never defended what he had done. He simply showed up again and again. The first time Lena let him hold Eleanor Rose alone, he did it like a man accepting both a gift and a sentence. He looked down at his daughter, the child whose existence had exposed to centuries of buried corruption, and whispered, "I will never let anyone make you feel unwelcome in your own story." Lena heard him from the doorway. She did not answer, but she remembered it. Months later, after the courts finalized the transfer of Blackthorn House and its historic endowment branch, reporters swarmed the gates, expecting Lena to move in and assume the role of triumphant new heiress. They expected portraits, statements, elegant vengeance. Instead, Lena stood on the front steps with Eleanor Rose in her arms and announced that Blackthorn House would be converted into a maternal health and legal advocacy foundation for women facing pregnancy-related abandonment, coercion, inheritance abuse, and medical intimidation. "This house was built on a mother's grief," she said. "It will not continue that legacy. From now on it will shelter women instead of silencing them." The statement traveled farther than any scandal ever had. Donors poured in. Survivors wrote letters. Women came from all over with stories that sounded different in detail but identical in pain. Husbands who vanished, families who demanded proof, institutions that treated pregnancy like public property. Lena read every letter she could, because for all the extraordinary twists of her story, the emotional core of it was heartbreakingly common. A woman carries life. The world tests whether she deserves dignity while doing it. As Eleanor Rose grew, Lena found pieces of herself returning in unexpected ways. She went back to restoration work part-time, bringing the baby to the foundation office some afternoons, where staff passed her around like a good omen. She laughed more, slept a little, learned that strength after betrayal is not a single dramatic rise but 1,000 small decisions. Eat, rest, sign the paper, answer the call, don't answer that one, keep breathing, keep going. Adrian remained. In their orbit changed, chastened, uncertain, trying. Some wounds do not close because someone apologizes. Some loves do not vanish because someone failed them. Lena understood both things now. She and Adrian were no longer husband and wife, in the old sense. The divorce became final quietly, without spectacle, but over time, something gentler and more honest began to exist where false security used to be. Not reunion, not yet, maybe not ever. Respect, perhaps, earned one day at a time. One evening, nearly a year after the gala, Lena attended a small memorial. The foundation held in the restored west garden of Blackthorn House. A plaque had been installed beneath a magnolia tree. For Eleanor Vale, whose child was taken. For Rose Hart, who raised love without the truth. For the women history, buried to protect powerful men. Josephine, frailer now, stood beside Lena with Eleanor Rose asleep in a carrier against Adrian's chest a few feet away. I used to think legacy meant preserving what was handed down, Josephine said. Lena looked at the old woman's profile, lined with regret and something almost like peace, asterisk. And now, Josephine watched Adrian gently rock the baby. Now I think it means ending what should never have survived. After the guests left and the lights dimmed, Lena wandered the garden alone. The night air was soft. Somewhere beyond the hedges, a fountain murmured. For the first time since the pregnancy began, she felt not just safe, but rooted. Not because the past had been corrected perfectly. It never could be. Not because justice had erased pain. It hadn't. But because truth, once finally spoken, had allowed something new to grow where silence used to own the ground. She thought of her mother then, of Elise bent over old pages, teaching her that forgotten things still matter. She thought of Rose Hart walking away from Blackthorn House with a baby that wasn't hers by blood but became hers by every act that counts. She thought of Eleanor Vale mourning a child she had been told was dead. She thought of the gala, of Vivian's voice slicing through the room, of Adrian's terrible silence, of the moment she had decided she would rather be broken in the truth than protected by a lie. And she thought of her daughter, Eleanor Rose, who would grow up never having to ask whether she belonged, because belonging, Lena had learned, is not granted by the people sitting at the highest table. It is not conferred by name, wealth, or the approval of those who mistake power for moral authority. Belonging is something no one can take from you once you know the truth of who you are. Behind her, footsteps sounded on the path. Adrian stopped, a few feet away, careful as always now, leaving room for her to choose. He nodded toward the sleeping baby in his arms. She finally gave up fighting sleep. Lena smiled. That's my daughter. Our daughter, he said softly. The words hung between them, not possessive, not demanding, just true. He hesitated. I know I don't get to ask for much, maybe anything, but I wanted to say this, where it matters. I spent most of my life believing loyalty meant protecting the people who raised me, even when they were wrong. I didn't understand that real loyalty is telling the truth before someone else bleeds for your comfort. Lena listened. He looked. Dan, I failed you at the moment you needed me most. Nothing will ever make that not true. But if you ever find room, years from now, for me to be more than a man who failed you, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I can be. The old Lena might have answered too quickly out of love, fear, hope, habit. This Lena let silence do its work. Then she stepped closer and adjusted the blanket around Eleanor Rose's tiny shoulder. I don't know what we'll be, she said, but I know what we won't be. He met her eyes. We won't be built on silence. His breath left him like relief and grief at once. No. She touched her daughter's cheek with one finger, then looked past Adrian toward the enormous house that had once symbolized everything cold, cruel, and inherited. Windows glowed warm now. Inside were cribs donated for emergency housing. Legal offices for women no one believed. Counseling rooms with soft chairs and locked doors. A nursery where no child would ever be treated like leverage. And records painstakingly preserved not to glorify a family, but to remember the cost of lies. That was legacy now. Not a surname, not a fortune, a correction. A mercy, a warning. Lena drew in a slow breath and felt at last the full shape of the story settle inside her. His family had demanded a blood test before accepting the baby. They wanted proof she hadn't betrayed them. What they got instead was proof that betrayal had begun in their own house 200 years earlier, when a powerful man stole one woman's child, buried another woman's truth, and built a dynasty on the bodies of mothers expected to stay silent. And in the end, the baby they tried to deny did what none of them had managed in generations. She brought the truth home.